Let's face it, cartoons from the 1970s weren't just weird. They were the fever dreams of animators left unsupervised with way too much sugar and zero adult supervision. Remember when cartoons actually made you question reality? Well, you're about to. So, how many of these bizarre, forgotten characters are still rattling around in your subconscious? Brace yourself. This isn't the nostalgia trip you're expecting. Some of these creations are so off the wall, you'll wonder if we collectively hallucinated them. Mr. Jaw. Okay, picture this. A blue shark in a purple bowler hat, speaking in a German accent and obsessed with eating one very unlucky fish. Welcome to the deranged world of Mr. Jaw from the Pink Panther show. You'd think a shark with class would be menacing, but no. Mr. Jaw was less Jaws and more Wile E. Coyote underwater, bungling his way through slapstick schemes with the help of his sidekick Catfish, who had a Brooklyn accent so thick you could spread it on toast. The show didn't just flirt with the absurd, it married it, moved in together, and had a bunch of half-shark, half-loony offspring. Mr. Jaw's main goal? Catch Harry Halibut, a fish who never seemed all that concerned for his life, perhaps because the shark's plans were always one banana peel away from total disaster. But what really made Mr. Jaw weird wasn't the top hat or the Teutonic snarl, it was the gleeful, fourth-wall-breaking chaos. This guy actually yelled, "He gotcha," before every failed attack, like a discount Bond villain with a fish fetish. Kids who grew up on Mr. Jaw have never quite recovered. And if you ever find yourself giggling at nothing during a seafood dinner, now you know who to blame. The Funky Phantom. Let's crank the dial on bizarre and meet the Funky Phantom. Picture the Scooby-Doo formula, now replace the stone dog with a full-blown Revolutionary War ghost. That's Mudsie, a bumbling sheet-wearing specter who, along with his ghost cat Boo, gets accidentally released from a grandfather clock by three mystery-solving teens. Now, Mudsie isn't exactly haunting material. He's more Casper than creepy, spouting corny jokes in a voice that sounds like he's perpetually mid-sneeze. The show's premise: Mudsie and the teens travel in a funky dune buggy, stumble into mysteries, and let Mudsie's ghost powers do the heavy lifting, usually by accidentally scaring the villains into confession. But the real kicker? Mudsie's Revolutionary War backstory, which the show references as if it makes perfect sense for him to be chilling with teenagers in the 1970s. The guy died hiding from redcoats, and now he's helping solve crimes in bell-bottom America. History teachers everywhere are screaming into the void. The Funky Phantom is the kind of fever dream that only the 1970s could produce. Proof that when you run out of dog breeds, you just start resurrecting old soldiers. Admit it, you forgot this guy existed, and now you kind of wish you could again. Grape Ape. You want weird? How about a 40-foot-tall purple gorilla with a voice like your uncle after 3 root beers, endlessly repeating his own name? Grape Ape, like a broken toy. That's the Great Grape Ape Show, and yes, it was somehow a real thing. Grape Ape is a walking violation of every rule of physics. He rides around on the roof of a tiny van driven by his nervous canine sidekick, Beagle. No, the van never collapses. No, nobody ever asks why the military isn't involved. It's all just, oh, look, there's a giant purple monkey again. The show's entire joke was built around Grape Ape's size and absolute obliviousness to the chaos he caused, whether flattening bridges, stomping through carnivals, or accidentally causing natural disasters with a sneeze. And in true Hanna-Barbera fashion, the laugh track treated every near catastrophe like the world's funniest home video. Even better, the name Grape Ape comes from, you guessed it, his color and his favorite snack, subtle. There's an innocence to Grape Ape's destructive path, but let's be real. If you saw a 40-foot ape today, you wouldn't offer him a grape. You'd run for your life and blame your childhood cartoons for all your irrational fears. Hong Kong Phooey. You think superhero parodies started with Deadpool? Pfft. Meet Hong Kong Phooey, a mild-mannered janitor dog named Penry who jumps into a filing cabinet and transforms into the world's most incompetent kung fu crime fighter. Transforms might be a stretch. He basically just puts on a bathrobe and a mask, and somehow the city's criminal underworld collectively forgets what a dog looks like. Hong Kong Phooey's secret weapon isn't martial arts. It's pure, unfiltered luck. He botches every fight, gets tangled in his own laundry, and survives only because his cat's sidekick, Spot, does all the actual hero work. And yet, every episode, the police and the townspeople treat him like Bruce Lee in a dog suit. This wasn't just funny animal does silly things. Hong Kong Phooey had a theme song that was catchier than the plague, nonsensical gadgets, and villain of the week plots so paper thin you could use them as napkins. The show rode the 1970s kung fu craze straight into the wall, parking itself in that sweet spot between homage and full-blown parody. To this day, nobody's really sure if Hong Kong Phooey was a secret genius, or if his entire run was a meditation on the sheer power of dumb luck. Either way, you can't forget a crime-fighting mutt with a bathrobe and a theme song that lives rent-free in your head, Mumbly. Let's talk about Mumbly, the detective dog who proved that snickering and mumbling could somehow pass for police work in the 1970s. Picture a shorter, scruffier version of Muttley from Wacky Races, but this time he's got a raincoat, a badge, and the world's worst case of "I'm just here for the paycheck" energy. Mumbly doesn't solve mysteries so much as trip over them, snickering through every arrest like he's got a private joke running in his head. His nemesis is the imaginatively named Chief Schnooker, a man so incompetent you start rooting for the criminals by episode 3. The gags mostly involve Mumbly outwitting bumbling bad guys by pure accident, followed by that iconic wheezing giggle. But what really set Mumbly apart from every other Hanna-Barbera canine wasn't just his near unintelligible mumbling, it was the fact that, for once, he wasn't sidekick material. No, in this universe, the muttering dog was in charge, running the show, and somehow still managing to look like he'd rather be napping. The Mumbly cartoon show only lasted one season, probably because it's hard to sell toys based on a character whose primary skill is grumbling under his breath. But for anyone who's ever watched a cartoon and thought, wow, even the animators must have been confused, Mumbly is your spirit animal. Jana of the jungle. How do you out-weird Tarzan? Apparently, you make him a blonde jungle goddess with a magic necklace, a pet leopard, and the best blow-dried hair on Saturday morning TV. Enter Jana of the jungle. Picture this: a shipwrecked little girl grows up swinging from vines, befriending every animal within a 100-mile radius and learning all the secrets of the wild while still managing to look like she stepped out of a shampoo commercial. Jana didn't just rescue animals, she delivered lectures about environmentalism and personal empowerment before karate-chopping poachers and occasionally actual supervillains. Her supporting cast? Try a wise old medicine man, a brooding adventurer, and her talking parrot sidekick Tico, who dispensed mystical wisdom like he moonlighted as a therapist. Every episode, Jana would consult her glowing necklace, which was somehow connected to the jungle's spirit, then launch herself into the kind of action sequences that made Tarzan look like a tourist. If that sounds like a lot, it was. The show balanced wild animal chases, psychic visions, and plenty of well-meaning 1970s messages about respecting nature. Honestly, it was less a cartoon and more a surreal fever dream from someone who just binge-watched Planet of the Apes and Charlie's Angels in the same night. Jana didn't stick around long, but her earnest weirdness lives on. If you're ever lost in the wild and find yourself talking to a glowing parrot, blame Jana, or, better yet, thank her for the pep talk. Blue Falcon and Dynamite. Who says Batman and Robin have to be human, or even competent? In the 1970s, the answer was Blue Falcon and Dynamite, the superhero team-up you never asked for, starring a stoic, cape-wearing crime fighter and his half-bionic, half-malfunctioning robo-dog. Blue Falcon looked the part. Square jaw, intimidating cape, classic serious hero voice. But every mission quickly went off the rails, courtesy of Dynamite, a mechanical mutt whose gadgets never worked as intended and whose blunders made Inspector Gadget look like a Nobel laureate. Jet pause, malfunction, Snoop nose, malfunction. Literally every high-tech contraption just ended up exploding, backfiring, or turning Blue Falcon into the city's least threatening superhero. And yet, the show loved to mash up action with pure chaos, sending Blue Falcon into fits of exasperation as Dynamite bumbled through their latest crisis. You could practically hear the animators giggling behind the scenes as each plot twisted into a Looney Tunes-level disaster zone. Side note, Blue Falcon sometimes popped up in other Hanna-Barbera cartoons, as if the universe just couldn't resist a good, serious guy versus disaster dog setup. The result? An oddly addictive mix of superhero parody, slapstick, and sci-fi gone haywire. If you ever wondered what it'd be like to fight crime with a dog that doubles as a walking mechanical hazard, Blue Falcon and Dynamite will answer your question and probably set your living room on fire in the process. The Neptunes, Jabberjaw. Let's get aquatic. You've seen Scooby-Doo, but what about a teen band that plays underwater concerts, solves mysteries, and travels with a joke-cracking, anxiety-riddled shark named Jabberjaw? Meet the Neptunes, a group that's equal parts rock stars and deep-sea detectives. Jabberjaw was basically Curly from the Three Stooges, reincarnated as a 6-foot air-breathing shark who desperately wanted respect. Spoiler, he never got it. The band? 4 teens whose personalities ranged from generic leader to girl with pigtails. But the real star was Jabberjaw, who couldn't go 5 minutes without some slapstick disaster, overblown self-pity, or a catchphrase so corny it should have come with a warning label, no respect. The show was a smorgasbord of 1970s tropes. The Neptunes zipped around in a futuristic sub, dodged evil scientists and sea monsters, and solved oceanic capers, all while managing to squeeze in a few musical numbers. Basically, imagine if the monkeys and Flipper had a baby and then sent it to live in the lost city of Atlantis. What made it truly weird wasn't just Jabberjaw's shtick, it was how the show mashed together genres, puns, and awkward humor, all set to a laugh track that made you question your own sanity. If you ever find yourself humming a random surf rock riff and blaming your childhood, odds are the Neptunes and Jabberjaw are to blame. Captain Caveman. If you thought superheroes were getting out of hand, try a prehistoric one who solves crimes by grunting, pulling random gadgets out of his club, and occasionally flying for no logical reason. Captain Caveman wasn't just the weirdest guy in Bedrock, he was the full package, shaggy, toothy, and capable of turning any mystery into a prehistoric panic attack. Let's break it down. The show followed Cavey and his 3 teenage sidekicks, the Teen Angels, as they traveled the world unmasking villains with a mix of wild improvisation and pure dumb luck. Captain Caveman could fly, sometimes, turn invisible, sometimes, or just swing his club and let chaos reign. His powers were as consistent as a broken vending machine. And then there's the voice. Mel Blanc, legendary for Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, went full throttle here, giving Cavey a guttural howl and a delivery that landed somewhere between Tarzan and a rock slide. Everything about Captain Caveman was big, loud, and blissfully nonsensical. Need to get out of a trap? He'd pull a full-sized helicopter out of his club like it was Mary Poppins' purse. Need a plan? Just scream, Captain Caveman, and hope for the best. That, my friends, is problem-solving Stone Age style. For everyone who ever wished Scooby-Doo had more chest hair and less logic, Captain Caveman was the answer, whether you wanted it or not. Drac Jr., the Drac Pack. What if the monsters weren't the bad guys, but their grandkids trying desperately to clear the family name? Welcome to the heroic horror of Drac Jr. and the Drac Pack. This is the story of Dracula's teenage grandson, yes, really, who teams up with the teenage descendants of Frankenstein and the Wolfman to right the wrongs of their infamous ancestors. Drac Jr. isn't your average vampire. He's got all the powers, turning into a bat, super strength, cape that doubles as a Swiss Army knife, but none of the sinister vibes. Instead, he spends his time outsmarting the villainous Dr. Dredd and the OGR gang, the Organization for Generally Rotten Enterprises. Subtle. Along with Frankie and Howler, Drac Jr. is constantly juggling monster drama with good old-fashioned teenage awkwardness. Every episode delivers a cocktail of monster puns, slapstick chases, and horror cliches flipped on their heads. You haven't lived until you've seen a werewolf try to blend in at a high school pep rally or a vampire get sunburned during a rescue mission. The Drac Pack was like a haunted house run by the Addams family's straight-A students. Ridiculous, lovable, and never quite as scary as they wanted to be. If you ever wondered what would happen if Universal's monsters joined the Boy Scouts, Drac Jr. and his crew have your answer. Speed Buggy. You think Scooby-Doo was a formula? Meet Speed Buggy, the stuttering orange dune buggy with a mind of its own, literally. Speed Buggy wasn't just sentient, he was the star. Forget the talking dogs and ghost-chasing teens. This time, you get a jalopy with a horn for a voice and a personality so jittery, you'd swear he'd been siphoning gasoline from an espresso machine. The premise? 3 human teens, Tinker the mechanic, Mark the cool guy, and Debbie the girl who's here, race around the globe in Speed Buggy, running into mad scientists, criminals, and the occasional robot army. Instead of, driving away, Speedy's always right in the thick of it, stammering, "Room-a-zoom-zoom," while somehow saving the day with his completely implausible gadgets and a knack for slapstick chaos. Every week, you'd get a pileup of puns, pratfalls, and chase scenes that made absolutely no sense. Plot holes? They're more like plot canyons. But kids ate it up because, really, who doesn't want a car that acts like a nervous sidekick and somehow always saves the day, despite being outsmarted by pretty much everyone, including chickens? In the pantheon of weird 70s mascots, Speed Buggy's up there. If you remember this one, you probably still have a soft spot for vehicles with more anxiety than horsepower. And honestly, wasn't that the dream before Teslas took over? Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. Did someone say teen pop group / international spies? No? Well, tough, because the 70s gave us Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, and they didn't even ask for your permission. Take one all-American heartthrob, his all-girl backup band, a comic relief dog, and a talking computer, then send them on tour around the world to stop crime. With music. This wasn't your average battle of the bands. Butch and his crew would roll up for a concert, play one groovy number, and then get a call from Mr. Socrates, a literal computer with a face that would brief them on the latest international crisis. No time to change out of your matching jumpsuits, kids. There's a diamond smuggler in Amsterdam. Butch was the golden-voiced lead. Marilee, the sassy keyboardist, Steffi, the tough bassist, Wally, the comic, and Elvis, the dog, who somehow managed to be more useful than half the cast. They'd solve mysteries, crack jokes, and make time for a song, all in 22 minutes of disco-laced, spy-fi chaos. The result? A blend of Monkees, Mission, Impossible, and a fever dream where your little brother's rock band somehow becomes the CIA. If you're wondering why you don't remember Butch and his gang, it's probably because your brain rejected the premise as too weird to file away, but hey, at least they had better hair than most real spy agencies. Inch High, Private Eye. If you thought the world had enough pint-sized heroes, think again. Inch High. Private Eye brought us a detective who was literally 1 inch tall, because why not? He wasn't just short on stature, he was short on everything: authority, logic, and the basic dignity required for a trench coat. The premise was as thin as the protagonist himself. Inch High worked for the Finkerton Detective Agency Subtle, right? Solving cases alongside his niece Lori, her boyfriend Gator, and their dog, Braveheart. Most detective work consisted of Inch High sneaking into places no full-sized PI could go, like inside a telephone, under a door, or through a keyhole. Real high-stakes stuff, if you're an ant. The gags were predictable, but kind of adorable. A thimble for a hat, paper clips as grappling hooks, and getaway vehicles that would fit in your lunchbox. Of course, half the fun was watching the Finkerton boss threaten to fire him every episode, only to be saved at the last second by some very, very tiny heroics. Why was he an inch high? Science? Magic? Animators who just stopped caring? The show never explains, and honestly, that's probably for the best. Inch High, Private Eye is the kind of weird that can only come from animators staring down a deadline and thinking, hey, you know what's never been done before? CB Bears. Trucking bears with walkie-talkies. Yes, really. That's the entire elevator pitch for CB Bears. 3 hirsute, jumpsuit-wearing bears named Hustle, Boogie, and Bump who roamed the highways in a garbage truck, solving mysteries at the drop of a banana peel. Oh, and every case comes in via CB radio because 1977 was the year trucker culture got mainlined into Saturday morning TV. The bears weren't exactly Sherlock Holmes. Their main qualifications were 1. They could wear hats. 2. They could bicker endlessly in weird fake Southern accents. And 3. They had a lady boss named Charlie, a la Charlie's Angels, who only spoke to them through their radios. The plots usually revolved around them disguising themselves, badly, as anything from plumbers to park rangers, all in pursuit of the week's villain. Think Scooby-Doo with a bigger vehicle and worse costumes. Every episode ended with some kind of garbage-related slapstick, a convoluted arrest, and Hustle delivering a closing pun so corny it could power a popcorn machine. And just when you think it can't get weirder, you remember they shared their hour with other segments like Shake, Rattle and Roll, and Hey, It's the King, proving the 70s were determined to cram as much animal-based nonsense onto TV as legally possible. CB Bears, solving crimes, making puns, and somehow not getting cited by the health department for their truck. Childhood was wild, wasn't it? The Groovy Ghoulies. The Munsters meet the monkeys with a little extra psychedelic sugar. Welcome to the Groovy Ghoulies. This monster mashup parade stars a rock band made up of classic Universal monster knockoffs. Drac the Vampire on organ, Frankie the Frankenstein's monster on drums, and Wolfie on, naturally, guitar, plus a supporting cast of pun-slinging goblins and cackling witches. And every single one of them seems to be hopped up on something other than Halloween candy. Set in Horrible Hall, a haunted mansion that makes Hogwarts look subtle, the Ghoulies delivered rapid-fire sight gags, endless puns, and musical numbers so catchy you'll want to exorcise them from your memory. These monsters didn't want to scare anyone. They wanted to be the life of the party, cracking jokes, playing tricks, and breaking the fourth wall every few seconds. The show was basically a Saturday morning variety hour with song performances, comedy sketches, and so many bad puns it would make your dad groan. Some episodes included mock news reports from skeleton reporters or were interrupted by a witch weather woman. The result? Complete and total chaos, a kid-friendly version of Laugh-In, but with fangs and fur. The Groovy Ghoulies are proof that sometimes the only way to revive classic monsters is to hand them instruments and let them rock out. If you ever find yourself dancing to a werewolf's guitar solo in your nightmares, you know exactly where it came from. The Impossibles, Super Globetrotters. You want weird? Let's talk superhero basketball. The 1970s served up the Super Globetrotters, where the world-famous Harlem Globetrotters double as actual superheroes, morphing into things like Multi-Man, who can duplicate himself endlessly, Spaghetti Man, who literally turns into noodles, Liquid Man, who becomes water, and more. But what most folks forget is this all came out of an even weirder concept: the Impossibles. Originally, the Impossibles were a three-man rock band who moonlighted as superheroes: Coil Man, Multi-Man, and Fluid Man, each with, you guessed it, impossible powers and a penchant for rock and roll puns. Flash forward to the late 70s, and their legacy lives on in the Super Globetrotters, with actual basketball icons transforming into cartoon freaks of nature. Why settle for slam dunks when you can shapeshift into a pile of spaghetti and tie up the bad guys? Episodes were a fever dream of nonsensical transformations and groan-worthy one-liners. The villains? Even weirder, think bad guys named Crimehead or Museum Man. The Globetrotters' secret lair was, naturally, a basketball gym, and every crime was solved with equal parts athleticism and supernatural slapstick. The real magic here? The show never once explained how world-famous athletes doubled as mutants or why their powers made so little sense. It didn't matter. If you ever caught yourself wishing your favorite band or sports team could fight crime, blame the Impossibles for planting that idea, and then dunking on logic itself. Rickety Rocket. Think Scooby-Doo in space. But instead of a dog, the mascot is a talking, wisecracking homemade rocket ship. That's Rickety Rocket, the star of a late 70s show featuring 4 black teenage detectives, the Far Out Detectives, solving crimes in a Jetsons meets blaxploitation future. Rickety Rocket was exactly what he sounded like: a junkyard-built rocket with a toothy grin, bulging eyes, and an attitude. His voice, high-pitched and full of sass with catchphrases that would make your grandma cringe. The kids would pile into Rickety and launch into a futuristic city where robots, mad scientists, and aliens ran amok. Did the rocket actually help solve crimes? Not really. Most episodes ended with Rickety making things worse, then somehow saving the day through pure accident and a couple of last-minute physics-defying stunts. But for all its oddball chaos, Rickety Rocket was one of the few cartoons of the era with black protagonists, giving it a cult status among fans. The mysteries were always wild. Think invisible crooks, haunted spaceships, or citywide food fights. The animation, low budget, the puns, relentless. Still, if you remember Rickety Rocket, you remember a show that smashed a ton of boundaries, for better or weirder. And if you ever tried to make your own rocket out of trash and hope as a kid, this show probably gave you the blueprint and the warning. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch. Now let's head to the open road, cartoon style. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch is a show where the main character is a bright red Volkswagen Beetle-like car named Wheelie, who doesn't talk, only beeps and honks, but still manages to have more charisma than half the 70s cartoon lineup. His nemesis? A gang of motorcycle bullies called the Chopper Bunch, led by what else? A mean-spirited chopper with a handlebar mustache. Each episode was one long chase, as Chopper and his gang, consisting of a three-wheeled trike, a snickering sidekick, and a sidecar with an inferiority complex, tried to outsmart or sabotage Wheelie. The catch? Wheelie always outsmarts them with silent film antics, slapstick gags, and more than a few improbable stunts. Dialogue? Minimal. Sound effects? Maximal. It's basically if Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner got an auto shop makeover and decided to just settle their differences with burning rubber and cartoon violence. The show leaned hard into vehicle personalities, giving every car and bike weird quirks, faces, and attitudes. If you've ever wondered why you talk to your car like it's a person, you can thank or blame Wheelie and his silent confidence. It's a show so odd, you could watch 10 episodes and still not be sure if it was real or just a fever dream after eating too much sugary cereal. Booby Bear, help, it's the Hair Bear Bunch. Now, imagine a Prison Break movie, but the inmates are groovy, Afro-sporting bears with a knack for con artistry. Welcome to Booby Bear and his pals in Help. It's the Hair Bear Bunch, the ultimate cartoon answer to What If Yogi Bear, but weirder. Booby Bear is the brains of the bunch, always scheming up new ways to break out of the Wonderland Zoo, which is run by a clueless zookeeper and his even more clueless assistant. His partners in crime, Square Bear, the muscle, and Hair Bear, the leader, whose hairdo could hide small animals. Their cell? Actually, a secret hideout that's decked out like a bachelor pad, complete with all the 1970s mod trappings the animators could stuff onto the screen. Plots ranged from simple escapes to elaborate scams, but the formula was always the same. Outwit the authority, get some snacks, and get back in time for nap hour. Booby's greatest talent? Out-talking anyone in the zoo and inventing gadgets out of nothing. If MacGyver were a bear, this would be him, except way more into practical jokes and with a much better disco soundtrack. The Hair Bear Bunch didn't last long, but Booby and his crew left a mark on the funny animal breaks the system genre. If you've ever felt like your workplace was just a more colorful zoo, Booby Bear is your patron saint of shenanigans. Morocco Mole, The New Adventures of Secret Squirrel. Let's round things off with a character who feels like he wandered in from another dimension. Morocco Mole is the fez-wearing, bespectacled sidekick to Secret Squirrel, a spy caper parody with all the surreal logic of the 70s. Morocco's whole deal? Picture Peter Lorre as a mole, complete with nervous muttering and a talent for getting kidnapped at least once per episode. He's the anti-Bond, bumbling, slow, and more likely to trip over his own fez than uncover an evil plot. Secret Squirrel always got the glory, but Morocco Mole was the heart, timid, loyal, and genuinely confused by the mayhem around him. Together, they bumbled through international incidents, madcap chase scenes, and enough absurd disguises to make Inspector Clouseau jealous. Morocco's biggest spy skill was hiding under random objects, shivering in fear, or accidentally saving the day through a complete lack of planning. In the rebooted New Adventures that aired throughout the 70s, he became even more lovable, and even more hopelessly unhelpful. But that's exactly why Morocco works. He's a soft-spoken, accidental hero who made espionage look more like a blooper reel than a slick spy flick. And if you've ever felt out of your depth but stuck it out anyway, Morocco Mole is basically your animated alter ego. And there you have it. The weirdest, wildest parade of 1970s cartoon oddballs you probably erased from your brain on purpose. Who knew childhood could be this bizarre? So, which character unlocked a memory you wish had stayed buried, and which ones did we somehow miss? Drop your favorite forgotten freaks in the comments, subscribe for more retro madness, and hit that share button if you survived the nostalgia overload. After all, isn't it time we finally admit the 70s were absolutely unhinged? Some 1960s cartoons were charming, others were just odd. And then there were the ones that felt like they were dreamed up in a caffeine-fueled lunch break with zero filter. These are the characters that make you pause mid-bite and think, what am I even watching? From bat superheroes with questionable sidekicks to telepathic walruses steering space adventures, we're counting down the 20 weirdest cartoon characters from the 1960s. And trust me, some will leave you questioning TV history itself. Batfink. On paper, a bat superhero with metallic wings sounds awesome. In reality, Batfink was a bizarre mashup of odd design choices and cultural blind spots. Created in 1966 by Hal Seeger, Batfink fought crime alongside his sidekick Karate, whose exaggerated martial arts moves and broken English became one of the most awkward things in children's television. The show's villains were equally puzzling, with Hugo Agogo leading the charge as a mad scientist clearly modeled after outdated stereotypes. Then came the Atom Boom episode, a lighthearted jab at nuclear warfare. During the Cold War, remember, kids back then were doing duck and cover drills. Joking about atomic bombs didn't go over well. By 1968, major stations were quietly dropping it, and Batfink's few surviving episodes were locked away. It's remembered less for its crime-fighting stories, and more as a case study in how good intentions can crash into questionable execution. Even so, that shiny wing design was good enough to be recycled in later cartoons, leaving Batfink as the odd, uncomfortable ancestor of better heroes. Stringer and Tubby, the Beagles. CBS thought they had a surefire hit in 1966, combined the world's most famous band with cartoon animals. Enter Stringer and Tubby, two beagle dogs playing in a rock band that was a little too obviously modeled after the Beatles. The music was fine, the animation was simple, and the humor leaned on puns. But then someone decided to sprinkle in references to expanding your mind and tripping over your own feet, which parents quickly realized were nods to the era's counterculture scene. The Beagles performed in clubs that looked suspiciously like real underground venues, with background characters swaying dreamily and talking about seeing colors when they played. Within 3 episodes, parent groups were outraged, religious organizations called for boycotts, and CBS was hit with legal trouble from the actual Beatles management for copying melodies. It lasted just 1 season before being yanked, with most episodes destroyed during a vault clean-out in the 1970s. Today, surviving clips float around as curiosities, relics of a time when studios underestimated just how closely parents were paying attention. Jack Wheeler, Hot Wheels. The late 1960s saw a toy revolution when Mattel launched Hot Wheels cars. Naturally, ABC jumped on the chance to turn the brand into a show. Jack Wheeler was the young racer at the center of this cartoon, zipping around in flashy cars and solving mysteries. The problem? Every car on the show could be bought in stores, sometimes appearing in toy aisles the same week an episode aired. The FCC doesn't like it when a cartoon is basically a commercial, and complaints rolled in fast. Parent groups accused Mattel of manipulating kids into begging for every new release. Competitors like Matchbox went further, filing complaints about unfair marketing. It didn't help that an insider leaked memos proving episodes were literally written to match upcoming toy launches. The fallout was massive. ABC canceled the show in 1971. Mattel was banned from making TV content for years, and Hot Wheels became a textbook example in marketing ethics classes. Ironically, the scandal only made the toys more popular. Kids just wanted what they couldn't watch. Sinbad Jr. Imagine a cartoon about the son of the legendary sailor Sinbad, but set in the modern-day Middle East of the 1960s, right in the middle of political tensions. That was the setup for Sinbad Jr., complete with a talking parrot sidekick named Salty. Instead of ancient myth, the show leaned on outdated cultural caricatures, camels parked next to cars, traditional robes alongside rotary phones, and villains from fictional nations always portrayed as backward and hostile. Arab American groups quickly protested, pointing out how damaging the stereotypes were. International pressure followed, with some Middle Eastern countries threatening to ban all Hanna-Barbera shows. Even the U.S. State Department reportedly nudged ABC to drop it, fearing it might hurt diplomatic relations. After 1 season, the show was pulled. Attempts to rework it into a pure fantasy failed because the character's reputation was already toxic. Hanna-Barbera later acted like the show never existed, leaving Sinbad Jr. as a cautionary tale in why modernizing a legend isn't always a good idea. Jasper, the Funny Company. The Funny Company started with a seemingly noble goal: bring kids from different ethnic backgrounds together for adventures. But in execution, it turned every character into a walking stereotype. Jasper, the African-American boy in the group, spoke only in rhyme and was constantly shown eating watermelon. The Mexican character had a heavy accent and loved taking siestas, while the Asian girl was shy, giggled constantly, and was obsessed with math. Episodes meant to celebrate diversity instead reinforced every cliché in the book. educational segments made it worse, showing cultural facts that were wildly inaccurate, like mud huts for Africa or dragons and fortune cookies for Asia. By episode 5, protests were underway. The NAACP, Congress of Racial Equality, and Jewish groups all condemned the show. Major cities pulled it from the air, and CBS quietly shut it down before all episodes even aired. The Funny Company is now remembered as a prime example of how good intentions can go completely off the rails, proving that inclusion done badly can be more harmful than not doing it at all. Telepathic Walrus, Rocket Robin Hood. Robin Hood in space was already an odd concept, but Rocket Robin Hood took it to another galaxy, literally. Airing in Canada and syndicated to US stations, the show featured a futuristic version of Robin and his merry men battling cosmic villains. Among his crew, a telepathic walrus. No explanation, no backstory, just a massive tusked creature who could read minds and dispense sage advice between battles. The walrus wasn't a side gag. He was treated as a serious member of the team, joining sword fights in zero gravity and helping plan missions to steal from galactic rich and give to the poor. Except these poor were often bizarre alien races, and the rich sometimes included interdimensional beings trying to collect all the universe's circles. Episodes swung between cheap, limited animation and completely nonsensical plots. One week, the walrus was fighting cyborg tax collectors. The next, he was helping reverse the polarity of imagination to save the galaxy. Parents were baffled, teachers complained it made kids spout nonsense in class, and psychologists warned it was confusing cause and effect thinking. Eventually, stations began dropping it, and CBC pulled the plug. Bootleg copies still circulate, with fans celebrating the walrus as one of the strangest cartoon characters ever put on television. Pow Wow, The Adventures of Pow Wow. In the early 1960s, someone decided kids needed a fun cartoon about Native Americans. The result was The Adventures of Pow Wow, and it was every stereotype in one show. Pow Wow, a young Native American boy, lived in a teepee, spoke in broken English, and solved problems using ancient wisdom, like talking to animals or interpreting smoke signals. Historically, none of it made sense. The setting mixed totem poles from the Pacific Northwest with Plains Indian headdresses, and the so-called cultural facts presented between stories were mostly made up. Children were told all Native Americans worshipped a great spirit, lived in teepees, and had no written language. Native American groups immediately protested. The National Congress of American Indians called it cultural erasure, disguised as entertainment. Veterans groups joined in, pointing out the insult to Native soldiers who had served in the military. By 1961, major stations were pulling it from their schedules. Screen Gems eventually withdrew the show, not because of a sudden conscience, but to protect a planned live-action Western from bad publicity. Today, Pow Wow is remembered as one of the most tone-deaf attempts at educational children's programming in TV history. Courageous Cat. In 1960, Batman co-creator Bob Kane decided to parody his own work. Courageous Cat was a caped feline hero with a sidekick named Minute Mouse. It should have been silly fun, except Courageous Cat carried an actual gun. The cat gun could shoot different projectiles, but many episodes showed him blasting enemies point blank with little hesitation. The violence was startling for a kid's show. Villains ended up frozen solid, burnt by pellets, or knocked unconscious with explosive rounds. Fight scenes were drawn with surprising detail, showing broken furniture, destroyed buildings, and occasionally injured characters. Parents flooded the National Association of Broadcasters with complaints, especially when reports came in of kids making homemade cat guns and play shooting each other after school. The show's moral compass didn't help. Courageous Cat often caused more damage than the criminals he fought, endangering civilians just to make a flashy entrance. Stations started dropping it, and while some markets kept it running for a few years, the combination of violence and moral ambiguity eventually sank it. Still, Courageous Cat remains a weird footnote in superhero history, the crime fighter who made Batman look restrained. Minute Mouse. As Courageous Cat's partner, Minute Mouse was supposed to be the level-headed counterpart to his gun-happy boss. Instead, he often ended up in equally violent situations, armed with gadgets that were barely safer. When Courageous Cat's gun wasn't enough, Minute Mouse was there with explosives, blinding powders, or a spring-loaded trap that could knock a villain across the room. Unlike sidekicks who serve as comic relief, Minute Mouse was a full participant in the chaos. He scaled walls, launched surprise attacks, and occasionally came up with plans that caused more destruction than the crimes they were trying to stop. The show's creators claimed the exaggerated violence was slapstick, but many sequences looked more like serious action scenes with cartoon blood swapped for smoke clouds. Reports of kids imitating Minute Mouse's tricks led to even more backlash, and by the late 1960s, his name was synonymous with the bad influence sidekick in some parent groups. Today, collectors hunt for old Courageous Cat episodes, partly for the sheer absurdity of seeing a small, polite-sounding mouse delivering knockout punches and tossing bombs like it's just another Tuesday. Milton the Monster. Debuting in 1965, Milton the Monster was Hanna-Barbera's attempt at a light-hearted Frankenstein spoof. Created by Professor Weirdo in a bubbling cauldron, Milton was meant to be a terrifying creature, except the professor accidentally poured in too much tincture of tenderness, making him gentle and polite instead of scary. Milton lived with other oddball monsters, including Hebe and Jeebe, a pair of bumbling henchmen, and a talking skull who gave advice. The humor leaned on visual gags, puns, and Milton's overly friendly nature clashing with spooky surroundings. While harmless in tone, the show's pacing and weird mix of horror and sweetness confused younger audiences. Some found Milton endearing, others found him unsettling, especially when episodes abruptly shifted from cheerful to creepy. Critics at the time didn't know who the show was for. Too silly for adults, too strange for many kids. It ran for just one season, but Milton's wide, toothy grin and awkward politeness made him one of the most memorably strange characters of the era. He remains a cult favorite among fans of vintage monster comedy. Clutch Cargo. If you've ever seen a cartoon character with eerily realistic human lips moving on an otherwise static face, you've probably stumbled across Clutch Cargo. This 1960 adventure series used synchrovox, a technique where live-action mouths were superimposed on still animation frames. The result was unsettling. Clutch was an intrepid pilot who traveled the world solving mysteries with his young sidekick and a dog named Paddlefoot. The stories were standard adventure fare, but the animation was barely animation at all. Most scenes were static images with just the mouth moving, giving the characters a strange, ghostly look. The low budget meant sound effects, and dialogue carried most of the storytelling. While kids tolerated it at first, critics and parents found the visuals bizarre, and even a little creepy. Some stations pulled it, claiming it gave younger viewers nightmares. Despite the weirdness, Clutch Cargo has a cult following among retro animation fans. It's often remembered less for its plots and more as an example of what happens when a studio tries to save money in the strangest way possible. Mighty Manfred the Wonder Dog, Beanie and Cecil. Beanie and Cecil was a beloved creation from Bob Clampett, but one of its strangest stars was Mighty Manfred the Wonder Dog, a massive, lazy hound. Manfred rarely moved faster than a slow trot and preferred lounging to heroics. Manfred's superpower wasn't strength or speed. It was his uncanny ability to get into ridiculous situations and somehow come out fine. Whether stranded at sea, trapped in a cave, or surrounded by villains, he'd yawn, blink, and eventually bumble his way into a solution. The humor came from his complete lack of urgency. In an era of hyperactive cartoon animals, Manfred's slow, mellow personality stood out. Kids found him funny, but some parents thought he encouraged laziness. Critics joked that he was the only wonder dog who looked like he needed a nap more than a mission. Still, Manfred became an oddly endearing part of the Beanie and Cecil legacy, proof that sometimes doing the bare minimum can still make you a star. Snuffles the Dog, Quick Draw McGraw. Quick Draw McGraw had his share of eccentric sidekicks, but Snuffles took the cake, or rather, the dog biscuit. Introduced in 1959 and appearing into the early 60s, Snuffles had a very specific quirk. He'd only help if you bribed him with a treat. When Quick Draw handed him a biscuit, Snuffles would float into the air, hugging himself in pure bliss before collapsing in a daze. This happened every single time, no matter the danger. Need him to chase a bad guy? Biscuit first. Rescue someone? Biscuit first. It was an oddly specific running gag that kids loved and parents found ridiculous. Some stations even complained that it promoted bribery and bad manners. But Snuffles' over-the-top reaction became iconic, turning him into one of Hanna-Barbera's most memorable side characters. Looking back, Snuffles is a reminder that even in the middle of a Western-themed action scene, a good snack can take priority over heroics. Tudor Turtle. Tudor Turtle might have looked like your typical friendly reptile cartoon character, but the premise behind his adventures was anything but ordinary. In every episode, Tudor decided he was tired of his regular life and wished to be something else. A fearless knight, a daring cowboy, a brave pilot, or some other exciting persona. His pal, the wise but slightly smug Mr. Wizard the Lizard, would grant the wish and send Tudor off into this brand new life. At first, things always seemed thrilling, but inevitably, Tudor would get in over his head. Whether it was facing down evil sorcerers, trying to outrun exploding spaceships, or bungling his way through Wild West showdowns, disaster was never far away. Eventually, Tudor would shout for help, and Mr. Wizard would whisk him back home with his trademark line, "Be just what you is, not what you is not." The message was clear, appreciate who you are, but the way it was delivered could be surprisingly intense. Some kids laughed at the slapstick disasters, while others found the constant peril a little stressful. With its whiplash jump from light comedy to chaotic danger, Tudor Turtle became one of the most unpredictable and oddly memorable cartoon characters of the 1960s. Fearless Fly. Fearless Fly was a superhero parody built entirely around one wonderfully absurd gimmick. A housefly who became invincible by putting on an enormous pair of glasses. In everyday life, he was just Hiram, a meek little insect buzzing around, avoiding swatters, and blending into the background. But the moment those oversized specs were on, he transformed into Fearless Fly, a caped crime fighter who could outmuscle thugs, outfly missiles, and dodge bullets like it was nothing. The transformation itself was half the comedy. The glasses looked ridiculously heavy for such a tiny creature, yet somehow granted him super strength, super speed, and nerves of steel. Of course, there was one major weakness. If a villain managed to knock the glasses off, Hiram instantly returned to being an ordinary, helpless fly. Many episodes revolved around crooks trying exactly that, leading to frantic mid-air chases and comically close calls. What really made Fearless Fly stand out was his delivery. He took himself completely seriously, delivering grand, noble speeches as though the fate of the entire world depended on him, even when the danger was something as small as a neighborhood cat. It was a strange mix of straight-faced heroics and visual silliness that stuck in kids' memories. Years later, you might still wonder if you dreamed it, but no, Fearless Fly was very real, and somehow, against all odds, he made it work. Super President. Yes, this was an actual cartoon. In 1967, NBC aired Super President, a Saturday morning series where the President of the United States moonlighted as a full-fledged superhero. Between cabinet meetings and state dinners, he secretly fought crime, battled aliens, and saved the planet on a regular basis. His powers were a grab bag of comic book cliches, super strength, rubber-like stretching, and even the ability to transform into pure energy. On paper, it might have worked as a light-hearted spoof. In execution, the show played it surprisingly straight. Episodes had the president abruptly leaving the Oval Office to punch out giant robots, stop volcanic eruptions, or wrestle sea monsters, all while somehow keeping his identity secret, despite vanishing during every major crisis. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it was too absurd to be taken seriously, while others, including real politicians, called it inappropriate to depict the commander-in-chief as a cartoon action hero. Parents complained about the level of violence for a kids' show, and ratings sank fast. NBC pulled the plug after one season, and Super President quickly faded into obscurity. Today, it's remembered as one of the most bizarre and ambitious blends of politics and Saturday morning animation, proof that the 1960s weren't afraid to try almost anything on TV, no matter how strange it sounded. Hector Heathcote. Hector Heathcote was introduced as the Minute and a Half Man, a well-meaning but bumbling Revolutionary War-era patriot who somehow kept stumbling into completely unrelated points in history. One week he might be trying to deliver an important message in colonial America, the next he'd be wandering the streets of ancient Egypt, and the week after that he'd find himself in the middle of a Wild West shootout. Produced by Terry Toons, the series leaned heavily into light-hearted absurdity. Hector would cross paths with famous figures, from George Washington to Cleopatra, and inevitably cause some important event to happen entirely by accident. His escapes from danger rarely involved skill. More often, he'd trip, fumble, or make a wrong turn that somehow worked in his favor. While the slapstick approach gave the show its charm, it also drew criticism from educators who disliked how it twisted historical facts beyond recognition. The anachronisms piled up, but that was exactly what young audiences loved. History served with pratfalls, talking animals, and the occasional runaway cannon. Despite the historical liberties, Hector developed a loyal following. He even starred in a series of educational shorts that were shown in some schools, though they were more comedic than academic. Today, Hector Heathcote stands out as a reminder that in the 1960s, a history lesson on television could be equal parts adventure, goofiness, and pure cartoon chaos. The Neptunes. Before Jabberjaw became Hanna-Barbera's most famous underwater band mascot, there were the Neptunes, a group of groovy teenage divers who balanced playing music with solving mysteries beneath the waves. The crew explored colorful underwater cities, encountered strange sea creatures, and somehow always managed to fit in a performance or two. The standout member by far was their drummer, a wisecracking, drumstick-wielding shark who managed to keep perfect rhythm despite having fins instead of hands. He was equal parts comic relief and action hero, cracking jokes one moment and bashing away at his underwater drum kit the next. The show itself was a strange but oddly charming mashup. Imagine Scooby-Doo with a heavy dose of bubble-filled musical numbers, all set against a backdrop of neon coral reefs and futuristic sea domes. One episode might feature chasing a ghostly figure through a kelp forest, while another had the band foiling a treasure-stealing villain before their big concert. While it never reached mainstream fame, the Neptunes carved out its own quirky niche. Viewers weren't always sure if they were watching a comedy, an adventure serial, or a rock concert in scuba gear, but that unpredictability was part of its charm. It didn't last long, yet it paved the way for the music and mystery formula that Hanna-Barbera would revisit throughout the 1970s, proving they weren't afraid to get weird under the sea. Ricochet Rabbit. Ricochet Rabbit wasn't just fast, he was practically a blur in a sheriff's badge. As the lawman of Hoop and Holler, his signature move was ricocheting off anything in sight to chase down outlaws. Walls, saloon doors, water towers, even people. Nothing was off limits. His extreme speed meant most of his lines came out in a rapid-fire blur, punctuated by his trademark ping, ping, ping as he zipped from place to place. Teamed with his polar opposite, the slow-moving and soft-spoken Deputy Droop-Along Coyote, Ricochet was part of a classic fast and slow comedy duo. Their contrasting styles created plenty of humor, with Ricochet ricocheting headfirst into trouble while Droop-Along shuffled along behind, eventually helping to save the day in his own plodding way. Kids loved the non-stop energy and wild chases, but some parents weren't thrilled about the constant collisions, pratfalls, and chaotic stunts. The sheer level of slapstick made it one of Hanna-Barbera's more frantic offerings, and there were murmurs that it encouraged reckless play. Still, Ricochet Rabbit stood out in a decade crowded with animated Western heroes. He wasn't just another cowboy with a horse. He was a sheriff who treated the entire frontier as his personal pinball machine. And really, how many lawmen can say ricocheting was their primary mode of transportation? The Great Gazoo. Introduced late in the Flintstones run, the Great Gazoo was a tiny, floating green alien exiled from his home planet as punishment for inventing dangerous devices. Banished to Earth, he landed squarely in the prehistoric town of Bedrock, where only Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble could see or hear him. Naturally, this led to endless misunderstandings with their families, who thought Fred and Barney were talking to themselves. Gazoo possessed advanced, almost magical technology capable of solving problems instantly, fixing machines, creating objects out of thin air, or transporting people anywhere in seconds. But instead of helping, he usually made things far worse. His smug, know-it-all personality didn't help matters either, often turning simple situations into chaos just to teach Fred and Barney a lesson. The character split audiences right down the middle. Some fans embraced the sci-fi twist as a fresh injection of silliness into a show that had been running for years. Others thought a futuristic alien clashed with the Stone Age setting and undermined the series' prehistoric charm. Despite appearing in only a small handful of episodes, The Great Gazoo left a massive footprint on the Flintstones' legacy. Love him or hate him, he's proof that even the most beloved shows can suddenly swerve into bizarre territory and still create a character people talk about decades later. From gun-toting cats to telepathic walruses, the 1960s gave us a gallery of cartoon characters so strange you'd swear they came from a fever dream. Some were ahead of their time, others were just plain misguided, but all of them left their mark on animation history. Which of these oddball characters do you actually remember watching? And which ones make you wonder how they ever got on the air? Drop your favorites in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep digging into the wild, weird past of television. Some cartoons from the 1980s were pure magic. Others were pure madness. This was the decade when toy companies, ad execs, and animators threw ideas at the wall to see what would stick. And sometimes the wall stuck back. You think you've seen weird? These characters took Saturday morning fun into bizarre territory. Which one of these oddballs do you actually remember? Let's dig into 20 of the strangest creations the 80s ever beamed into our living rooms, starting with a hero powered by fruit. Bananaman. Imagine a superhero whose power source isn't sunlight, radioactive accidents, or billion-dollar gadgets, but bananas. That's Banana Man, a British import that managed to make its way onto American TV screens. By day, Eric is a mild-mannered schoolboy. By banana, he's a muscled-up, mask-wearing crime fighter with the strength of 20 men and the IQ of maybe 2 on a good day. The transformation was pure comic absurdity. Eat one banana, boom, instant costume change, and superpowers. Bananaman fought equally ridiculous villains like Dr. Gloom and General Blight in brightly colored adventures that leaned into slapstick chaos. The humor was so over the top it made other kids' shows look subtle. The show's style was unapologetically cartoonish, with exaggerated animation, quick gags, and the kind of puns that make parents groan. What made Bananaman weird wasn't just the premise. It was the fact that the show played it straight. In its universe, a man powered by potassium was perfectly reasonable. While it never became a massive hit in the US, those who saw it remember the theme song and the nonsensical heroics like it was yesterday. Bananaman proved that in the 80s, even your lunchbox snack could save the day. Turbo Teen. Here's one for the Did I Dream That files. Turbo Teen followed Brett Matthews, a teenager who, after a bizarre lab accident, gains the power to transform into a red sports car whenever he's exposed to heat. Yes, heat. Splash cold water on him and, poof, he's human again. This meant entire episodes revolved around keeping Brett from overheating or finding ways to conveniently douse him when trouble struck. The weirdness didn't stop there. His friends, including a token comic relief dog, would literally hop into Brett's car form and drive him into danger. The show tried to mix action with mystery, having the gang solve crimes and battle villains, but you could never ignore the fact that our hero's main power was becoming an actual vehicle. Animation-wise, Turbo Teen had that glossy Saturday morning look, with dramatic transformation sequences that somehow managed to be both cool and deeply unsettling. Imagine limbs stretching into fenders and a face flattening into a hood. Kids didn't think too hard about the mechanics. Adults probably shouldn't either. Turbo Teen only lasted a season, but it became a cult oddity precisely because of its outlandish concept. Even in a decade of toy-driven, logic-bending cartoons, this one was in the fast lane to Weirdville. Meatball, Galaxy High School. If you went to Galaxy High School, your locker neighbor might be a blob. Meatball, a floating, talking meatball-like alien, was one of the more unusual students roaming the hallways of this short-lived sci-fi comedy. Galaxy High was all about two Earth teens transferred to a high school in outer space, where the student body was a buffet of oddball aliens. Meatball stood out for his wisecracks, perpetual hunger, and bouncy animation style. He had no visible limbs, just expressive eyes and a mouth that never stopped running. The writers used him for quick gags and background antics, but he often ended up stealing scenes from the human leads. The show itself was a clever mix of teen sitcom tropes and absurd sci-fi, think lockers that talk back, and gym class in zero gravity. Meatball fit right in as the comedic glue that kept the tone light, even when plots leaned into full-on ridiculousness. While Galaxy High School only lasted one season, Meatball remains burned into the memory of viewers who loved his silly energy. In an era of humanoid heroes, he proved you didn't need arms or legs to be a standout character, just a good punchline and the willingness to roll with it. Boulder, Rocklords. From the people who brought you GoBots, the budget Transformers, came Rocklords, a toy line and cartoon that asked, what if our transforming robots were rocks? Boulder was the heroic leader of these rock warriors, and yes, his disguise was literally a big boulder. The concept was as clunky as it sounds, alien robots who could fold up into stone forms to hide from enemies. Boulder was your standard noble leader archetype, except his big, dramatic transformation involved curling up and turning into a lump. The animation tried to sell it as epic, with bright lights and intense music, but there was no getting around the fact that he was basically a paperweight with feelings. The Rock Lords movie and tie-in media tried to expand their universe, introducing factions and lore, but it never caught on the way GoBots or Transformers did. Part of the problem was that their vehicle mode was stationary. Boulder himself was likable enough, but when your special ability is look like landscaping, you're fighting an uphill battle for toy aisle dominance. Today, Boulder is remembered as a shining example of 80s toy and cartoon excess, proof that in the rush to create the next big thing, sometimes you just end up reinventing the rock. The Noid. If you grew up in the 80s, you might remember being told to avoid the Noid. Originally a mascot for Domino's pizza commercials, this red-suited gremlin was so weirdly popular, he got his own animated adventures. The Noid's whole deal was sabotaging pizza deliveries, using gadgets and slapstick schemes to ruin your dinner. In cartoon form, the Noid was an over-caffeinated ball of chaos. He zipped around with cartoon physics, broke the fourth wall, and generally acted like the Tasmanian Devil's more annoying cousin. The humor was loud, fast, and just a little mean-spirited, after all. His main goal was to make you hungry but frustrated. The weirdest part was how hard Domino's pushed him. The Noid had merchandise, a video game, and even holiday specials. In the cartoon, writers leaned into surreal gags, putting him in bizarre settings like outer space or medieval castles, all while chasing down unsuspecting delivery drivers. While the Noid eventually vanished in the 90s, his brief run in animation is a perfect snapshot of the era's anything-goes marketing. He wasn't just a mascot, he was a mascot with his own world, rules, and logic. And if you were a kid in the 80s, you probably loved every nonsensical second of it. Captain Lou Albano as Mario, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. Long before Mario was leaping across movie screens, he was dancing awkwardly in front of a live-action set, portrayed by none other than professional wrestling legend Captain Lou Albano in the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. Each episode opened and closed with live-action skits starring Albano as Mario and Danny Wells as Luigi, sandwiched around animated adventures. Albano's take on Mario was gloriously weird. He kept the signature mustache but also brought his larger-than-life wrestling energy, turning Mario into a boisterous, hand-gesturing ball of enthusiasm. He'd break into the Mario dance mid-conversation, shout goofy catchphrases, and interact with guest stars ranging from pro athletes to 80s sitcom personalities. In animation form, the show stuck closer to the video game, but the live-action framing was where the real oddity lived. Albano clearly had fun, often slipping into ad-libs and mugging for the camera. He didn't just play Mario, he played Mario if he were your eccentric uncle who ran a plumbing shop and somehow knew Elvira. While critics were baffled, kids loved it, and the show became a strange yet beloved piece of Mario's history. Watching it today is like peering into an alternate universe where the most famous video game hero is also part of a wrestling tag team. Frady Cat. Meet a cartoon feline with the worst luck in the world, Frady Cat. This anxious orange house cat had already burned through 8 of his 9 lives, and each time he blurted out a number from 1 to 8, the ghost of that life would appear, usually to cause trouble instead of helping. Frady wasn't brave or clever. He was a bundle of nerves who stumbled from one mishap to another. The show's humor leaned heavily into his bad fortune, throwing him into slapstick situations involving alley dogs, cranky landlords, and supernatural chaos. The ghost lives were each distinct, ranging from a swashbuckling pirate to a medieval knight, and they often made things worse by dragging Frady into absurd adventures. What made it extra odd was the show's tone. It mixed light-hearted cartoon antics with a running theme of constant danger for its main character. The animation was simple, almost crude compared to bigger-budget 80s fare, but that only made it more surreal. Though Frady Cat never broke into mainstream popularity, he earned a spot in the memory of those who caught reruns. His premise was too strange to forget, a cat constantly haunted by himself in more ways than one. Synergy. Gem and the Holograms. In the glitter-covered universe of Gem and the Holograms, outrageous fashion and rock music ruled. But behind it all was Synergy, a giant, sleek computer AI that could project life-sized holograms anywhere. Created by the father of lead singer Jerrica Benton, Synergy wasn't just a backstage prop, she was the band's secret weapon. Synergy's personality was calm, almost motherly, guiding Jerrica with cryptic advice while producing visual illusions that could change identities, create elaborate stage effects, or throw enemies off their game. She lived inside a hidden wall compartment with glowing purple panels and a voice that sounded like it belonged to an intergalactic diplomat. The weirdness came from how casually the characters used her powers. Need to hide from a gang of rival rockers, full-body disguise in seconds. Need to perform a music video on the moon? Synergy can make it happen without leaving the building. In a show about glam rock, she was basically a superhero machine disguised as stage tech. While Synergy was treated with reverence, her existence also raised questions. Why wasn't she revolutionizing the entire entertainment industry, or the world? Instead, she stayed loyal to Gem's band, quietly proving that in 80s cartoons, even cutting-edge AI could have a favorite rock group. Q*bert, animated version. The arcade hit Q*bert was a simple game. Hop across a pyramid of cubes, avoid enemies, change colors. But when he got his own cartoon, producers decided to give him a nose and a voice and a high school setting. Suddenly, Q*bert wasn't just a hopping orange blob. He was a full-on teen with friends, rivals, and a Letterman jacket. In the show, Q*bert lived in Q*burg, a pastel-colored world where every character looked like a mutated cousin of the game's hero. Plots revolved around school hijinks, sports competitions, and slapstick chases, with occasional nods to the arcade gameplay. Enemies from the original game, like Coily the Snake, were recast as neighborhood troublemakers. What made it odd was how far the cartoon drifted from the source material. The game had no story, yet here was Q*bert dealing with homework, dating drama, and even holiday specials. The result was part Archie comics, part Fever Dream, all filtered through bright, geometric backgrounds. It didn't last long, but the Q*bert cartoon remains a fascinating example of 80s adaptation logic. Take a video game with no plot and turn it into a teen sitcom. Because why not? Bert Raccoon, The Raccoons. Canadian import. The Raccoons was a warm, environmentalist-leaning series, but its lead character, Bert Raccoon, gave it a unique twist, with his pink nose, fluffy tail, and a mullet that would make any hair metal guitarist jealous. Bert was an endlessly energetic troublemaker, living in the peaceful evergreen forest. Bert's adventures often involved foiling the schemes of greedy industrialist Cyril Sneer, who was perpetually trying to exploit the forest. While the show carried a message about conservation and friendship, Bert's antics gave it a wild edge. He was impulsive, sometimes reckless, and always ready to drag his friends into a plan that probably hadn't been thought through. The show's animation was surprisingly detailed for its time, with rich backgrounds and expressive characters. Its closing theme song, Run With Us, became a cult favorite, cementing its nostalgic appeal. Bert himself was a blend of classic cartoon mischief maker and 80s cool kid, a combo that could only have existed in that decade. He might not have been the weirdest character in terms of concept, but his look and personality made him unforgettable to anyone who tuned in. Count Duckula. In a decade full of anthropomorphic animals, Count Duckula still managed to stand out by being a vegetarian vampire duck. This green-feathered oddball lived in a gothic castle with his bumbling butler and a stern housekeeper, drifting from one absurd adventure to the next. The gag was that while his ancestors drank blood, Duckula preferred vegetables, especially carrots. His lack of traditional vampire traits didn't stop him from getting into trouble, often thanks to his own greed or curiosity. Episodes bounced between parodying horror tropes and diving into full-blown slapstick, with Duckula scheming to become rich or famous. The castle itself was a character, able to teleport anywhere in the world. One week, Duckula might be chasing treasure in Egypt. The next, he'd be in a Wild West showdown. The humor mixed wordplay, physical comedy, and an undercurrent of sarcastic wit that appealed to older viewers as much as kids. Though it aired primarily in the UK, its run on Nickelodeon in the US made Count Duckula a cult favorite. the image of a cape-wearing duck with fangs, refusing to touch blood but happily devouring a salad, was pure 80s cartoon absurdity and unforgettable once you saw it. Sharky the Shark Dog, Turbo Teen. As if a boy turning into a sports car wasn't strange enough, Turbo Teen doubled down on the weirdness with Sharky, a half-shark, half-dog sidekick. Sharky's design alone was a conversation starter, the head and dorsal fin of a shark, paired with furry legs, a wagging tail, and canine mannerisms. In the show, Sharky served as comic relief and occasional rescuer. He could swim like a shark, run like a dog, and confuse anyone who tried to make sense of what they were looking at. His loyalty to Brett and the gang meant he often jumped headfirst into danger, whether it was chasing down villains or sniffing out clues. What made Sharky especially odd was how normal the characters treated him. No one in-universe questioned why a shark-dog hybrid was hanging out with humans and a part-time sports car. The animators leaned into his comedic potential, giving him exaggerated reactions and a habit of stealing food when no one was looking. Sharky didn't have the same plot-driving role as Brett, but he left a lasting impression. In the wild laboratory of 80s cartoons, he was proof that if you could dream it, you could animate it, no matter how many animal combinations it took. Rubik the Amazing Cube. Few cartoons scream 80s like Rubik the Amazing Cube, a magical, talking Rubik's Cube that floated, had a face, and could only speak in a squeaky voice. This wasn't just a toy tie-in. Rubik had actual powers, from teleportation to transformation, and he used them to help a group of kids solve problems. The catch: Rubik only worked when all his sides were solved. If scrambled, he lost his powers and became just another puzzle cube. This led to entire plots revolving around keeping him solved while dodging bad guys who wanted to steal him. The show blended adventure, slapstick, and a surprising amount of earnest friendship talk between the kids and their cube companion. Rubik's powers were a writer's playground. One week he'd create a magical disguise. The next, he'd build a bridge out of thin air. His high-pitched giggle and glowing eyes made him both endearing and slightly unsettling. While the cartoon didn't last long, Rubik remains a perfect example of 80s marketing colliding with Saturday morning storytelling. A puzzle toy as a superhero sidekick? Only in this decade could something so bizarre make it to air. Venger, Dungeons & Dragons. The Dungeons & Dragons cartoon gave kids epic fantasy adventures, but its villain, Venger, was a special kind of strange. Tall, draped in dark robes, and sporting a single horn jutting from his forehead, he was part sorcerer, part demon, and entirely obsessed with capturing the magical weapons of the show's young heroes. Venger's powers were as over-the-top as his design. He could summon storms, create illusions, and teleport at will. His voice, deep and menacing, made every appearance feel like a boss battle. Yet, despite his frightening presence, the show gave him moments of surprising depth, hinting at a tragic past and even a family connection to the mysterious dungeon master. The weirdness wasn't in his menace, it was in his restraint. For all his power, Venger rarely destroyed his enemies outright, preferring elaborate schemes that the kids inevitably foiled. His design, with that lone horn and glowing red eyes, looked like something out of a darker, older fantasy than the rest of the show. Venger became one of the most memorable villains of 80s animation, not because he was the scariest, but because he was the most haunting. He wasn't just evil, he was theatrical, and in the 80s, that was everything. J. Wellington Wimpy, Popeye and Son. Wimpy, the hamburger-loving schemer from Popeye's original adventures, got a peculiar revival in the 1980s with Popeye and Son. This version of Wimpy kept his love for burgers, but was updated or downgraded depending on your view, with softer edges and exaggerated comedic bits. In the show, Wimpy often hung around Popeye's family, mooching meals and offering questionable advice. His schemes to get free food ranged from the mildly clever to the outright ridiculous, and his trademark line about paying Tuesday for a hamburger today never stopped making appearances. The weird part was how much the show leaned into his quirks. In classic Popeye shorts, Wimpy was a side gag. Here, he sometimes drove entire subplots, whether it was entering a burger eating contest or accidentally getting roped into a villain's plan. The animation gave him exaggerated expressions and comical body language, making him more of a slapstick figure than before. While Popeye and Son didn't have the staying power of the original cartoons, this 80s take on Wimpy was memorable for how far it pushed an already odd character. In a decade full of strange ideas, turning a lazy freeloader into a recurring comedic force, Bionic 6's FLUFV. In the superhero family cartoon Bionic 6, the parents and kids were cybernetically enhanced heroes. But the true scene stealer was FLUFFI, their robotic gorilla butler. Yes, a kung fu fighting, house cleaning, tech-savvy gorilla in a bow tie. FLUFFI's role mixed slapstick comedy with genuine usefulness. He'd serve breakfast one moment and then leap into battle the next, swinging bad guys around like rag dolls. His voice was a mix of grunts and cheerful tones, making him oddly endearing despite his intimidating size. The animators gave him expressive eyes and comedic timing that landed perfectly in both domestic scenes and high-energy fight sequences. What made FLUFFI stand out was how seamlessly he fit into the Bionic 6 household. Nobody questioned why a robot gorilla was doing laundry. It was just another Tuesday. And when danger struck, his martial arts skills made him as valuable as any of the human heroes. FLUFFI represented the 80s knack for mashing together unrelated concepts just to see if they worked. In this case, they did. He wasn't just comic relief. He was a functioning member of a superhero team. And in a decade obsessed with over-the-top sidekicks, a cyber gorilla with a cleaning streak was right at home. Tyrone, Wild West COW Boys of Moo Mesa. Wild West COW Boys of Moo Mesa took the idea of anthropomorphic animals and cranked it up with cowboy hats, spurred boots, and a full-on Western setting. At the center of it was Tyrone, an anthropomorphic steer who served as one of the town's main protectors. Tyrone's design was pure 80s excess, part cowboy hero, part cattle, complete with a jawline that looked carved from stone and horns sharp enough to hang a hat on. He talked like a Western lawman, rode horses despite being a steer himself, and could lasso troublemakers with impressive precision. The show leaned into old-school cowboy tropes, but the sheer absurdity of a Wild West populated entirely by bovines made it unforgettable. Tyrone was a natural leader, brave and level-headed, but his interactions with other animal cowpokes often descended into comedic chaos. Saloon brawls, train robberies, and duels at high noon were all standard fare. Just replace the human gunslingers with cattle in denim. While Moo Mesa never hit the popularity heights of other anthropomorphic shows, Tyrone's presence made it a cult gem. He proved that in the 80s, even the toughest cowboy could also be livestock. Mother Brain, Captain N the Game Master. Based on the villain from the video game Metroid, the cartoon version of Mother Brain was something else entirely. Instead of a silent, menacing AI, she was a giant, talking brain in a jar with a loud personality, thick lipstick, and an attitude that could fill a room. In Captain N, the Game Master, Mother Brain ruled over Videoland's villains with a combination of sarcasm, scheming, and bursts of theatrical rage. Her voice, provided with a sassy, exaggerated delivery, turned her from a cold, calculating mastermind into a full-on cartoon diva. She had tentacles for manipulating controls, expressive eyes, and a habit of delivering long-winded threats to the heroes. The weirdness came from how much personality she had compared to her video game counterpart. The original Metroid villain was intimidating because she was silent and alien. The cartoon flipped that completely, making her loud, flamboyant, and oddly charismatic. Mother Brain's design, with that oversized dome and bright cosmetics, made her visually unforgettable. In a show full of bizarre reinterpretations of video game icons, she managed to steal every scene. Watching her chew the scenery was half the fun, and exactly what made her such a standout in 80s cartoon weirdness. Rover, the Get Along Gang. The Get Along Gang was about a group of animal friends who solved problems, learned lessons, and promoted teamwork. But among them was Rover, a roller skating raccoon in a Letterman jacket. Rover combined three very 80s elements: anthropomorphic animals, sports fashion, and the belief that roller skates made everything cooler. In the show, Rover was the energetic, sometimes impulsive member of the gang. He often zipped into scenes on his skates, sometimes causing more trouble than he solved. The animation exaggerated his movements, making him constantly in motion, spinning, leaping, and occasionally crashing into a conveniently placed stack of boxes. His personality was all charm and enthusiasm, with just enough mischievous streak to keep things interesting. Whether the gang was organizing a charity event or stopping a neighborhood bully, Rover's skates inevitably played a role in the resolution, or the problem. While the Get Along Gang was wholesome to the core, Rover gave it an extra dose of kinetic energy. In an era when roller skating was a pop culture staple, making it a core part of a cartoon character's identity just made sense, even if that character happened to be a raccoon. Tudor Turtle, Here Comes the Grump Revival. Tudor Turtle began life in the 1960s, but his appearance in the 1980s revival of Here Comes the Grump brought his oddball charm to a new generation. Tudor was an inept turtle who dreamed of exciting adventures far beyond his skill set. Every episode, Tudor would wish to become something grand, a knight, a cowboy, a pilot, and be magically transported into that role. Inevitably, he'd mess things up in spectacular fashion, requiring rescue from his wisecracking friend Mr. Wizard the Lizard. The magic words to send him home were always the same, and part of the running gag was how often they had to be used. What made Tudor strange was his eternal optimism, despite his constant failures. The humor came from watching him bumble through increasingly ridiculous scenarios, somehow making even the simplest tasks go sideways. His nasal voice, slow gait, and perpetual confusion gave him an underdog quality that made him oddly lovable. In a decade full of high-energy, action-heavy cartoons, Tudor Turtle's low-key, repetitive misadventures were refreshingly and hilariously out of place. He was proof that in the 80s, not every cartoon hero had to be competent, or even remotely prepared for the job. The 80s didn't just give us heroes and villains. It gave us some of the strangest characters ever to hit Saturday mornings. From cube-shaped companions to cowboy cattle, these oddballs made cartoons unpredictable and unforgettable. Which one do you remember best? Drop it in the comments, subscribe for more retro dives, and keep those weird memories alive. Ever wondered how far 80s TV producers would stretch suspension of disbelief? In a decade defined by neon, synthesizers, and sheer optimism, network execs greenlit concepts so bizarre they'd make today's streaming hits look grounded. In this countdown of 20 of the weirdest, most forgotten 1980s series, you'll discover premises that teeter between sci-fi fever dream and midnight marathon oddity. Dive in and prepare to be astonished by storylines that networks somehow thought would fly. First, Manimal Drive. Jonathan Chase is a high society criminologist who can literally morph into any animal, most memorably a sleek Black Panther, using a painfully protracted special effects sequence repeated in every episode. Despite a premise that sounds like X-Men meets Magnum P.I., the transformation scenes were so ersatz, hands turning into claws in slow-mo anguish, that they became unintentionally hilarious. Chase's casual attitude toward ripping off his shirt to reveal fur, then sprinting down city streets, stranded the drama in camp. NBC pulled the plug after just 8 episodes, but Manimal gained cult status through reruns. Its legacy lives on as proof that, in the 80s, getting a green light only meant risks welcome, not audit your own logic. 2. The Powers of Matthew Starr. Imagine a teen who must juggle high school drama and constant assassination attempts by alien mercenaries. Welcome to Matthew Starr's world. Born E-Hawk on troubled planet Quadras, he adopts a human identity and telekinetic powers to blend in as a typical American teenager. Lou Gossett Jr. co-stars as his guardian, posing as Matthew's high school teacher to shield him from cosmic threats. Midway through the lone season, producers abruptly dumped the school life vignettes, pivoting into full-blown spy thriller territory. One episode sees Matthew racing to foil a terrorist plot, instead of asking a girl to prom. Audiences tuned out. After 22 episodes, NBC yanked the plug. Yet its tonal tug-of-war between teenage angst and intergalactic espionage remains a quintessential 80s oddity. 3. Automan, rather than Ottoman, this was Automan, a crime-fighting hologram born from a genius computer program created by Walter Nebuchar. Late-night power dips magically allowed a neon avatar to materialize, clad in glowing contours straight out of Tron. His sidekick, Cursor, is a pixelated spark that conjures vehicles, autocars that can whip around corners at impossible angles, routinely slamming Walter into windshields. Episodes combine techno-noir ambition with laughably cheap sci-fi. Imagine a partner who phases through walls but can't spare you whiplash. ABC shelved it after 13 episodes. One even remained unaired. Still, Ottoman's retrofuturistic vision of AI booting itself into flesh gave viewers a glimpse of a world where computers could literally walk off the screen. 4. Max Headroom. Long before our streaming algorithms judged our tastes, Max Headroom was cable's own glitchy oracle. as investigative reporter Edison Carter exposes a sinister media conglomerate. A near-fatal accident digitizes his mind into a stuttering, wisecracking AI that hops from screen to screen. Though viewers saw Max as rubber mask prosthetics and green screen trickery, it delivered a prescient satirical vision, a dystopia where broadcast networks monitor every move. Max's signature stammering voice and unnerving grin became cultural touchstones. He even hawked New Coke. Despite biting commentary about corporate control, the show lasted only 14 episodes. Yet, its eerie foresight on media consolidation and digital personas ensured that Max Headroom's shadow lingers in cyberpunk lore. 5. Jennifer Slept Here. Jillian Jennifer Krell was a glamorous Hollywood actress who died in a freak ice cream truck accident, then haunted her old Beverly Hills home as an upbeat, advice-dispensing ghost. Only teenager Joey Elliott can see and hear her, so he confesses homework woes, dating dramas, and locker room torment to his spectral BFF. Meanwhile, parents and friends chalk up Joey's odd behavior to teenage mood swings. Jennifer floats through walls, zaps into closets, and offers tongue-in-cheek guidance on clicks and crushes. NBC greenlit 13 episodes, but the awkward blend of supernatural comedy and teen soap fell flat. By the finale, viewers were left wondering, was Joey just hallucinating? Jennifer's unfinished storyline cements this series as one of the decade's most puzzling vanishings. 6. Slim Goodbody, The Inside Story. Picture: a health educator wearing a skin-tight, flesh-colored bodysuit painted with organs, veins, and bones. His very skin, a living anatomy chart. John Burstein's Slim Goodbody tromps onto school auditorium stages, lectures kids on fiber, nutrition, and dental hygiene while sporting a giant cartoon heart emblem on his chest. Intended as an educational tool, the suit's hyper-real depiction of intestines and ribs hover just a hair above disturbing, making many children shriek in terror. Though only 10 episodes aired, Slim's unsettling look made him a 70s-80s staple. PBS reran the segments for years, and Burstein toured schools nationwide. For countless Gen Xers, Slim's body-painted superhero persona offers both cringe and nostalgia. No wonder it remains a borderline nightmare and a cherished memory all at once. 7th, Rubik, The Amazing Cube. In a blatant case of Saturday morning cross-promotion, Rubik the Amazing Cube turned the ubiquitous puzzle toy into a living, talking hero. 3 Hispanic siblings, Carlos, Liza, and Ronaldo Rodriguez, discovered that aligning Rubik perfectly brings him to life, complete with animated facial features, tiny limbs, and magical powers like teleportation and time travel. Voiced in a high-pitched chipmunk-like tone, Rubik deploys his abilities to help kids out of jams, only to be pursued by a mustachioed evil magician who wants to recapture the cosmic cube. With 18 episodes from fall 1983 to early 1984, the show tried to sell kids on a cube that could fly and zap lasers, yet the real Rubik's Cube remained inert. Beyond its singularity, this cartoon perfectly encapsulates how merch-driven 1980s networks could be. 8th Turbo Teen. Brett Matthews leads an average life, or so he thinks. After a freak government experiment gone awry, Brett acquires a mind-bending ability. When his body temperature climbs above normal, he transforms into a bright red sports car. No matter the trigger, running, stress, or romance, Brett's flesh morphs into metal mid-episode, leaving friends scrambling to reassemble or race off in his car form to foil criminals. WWBW and his nefarious henchmen constantly hound Turbo Teen, hoping to weaponize his shiny chassis. Over 13 episodes, viewers watch Brett navigate drifting identities, literal hot-headedness, and car chases, as a teenager stuck between pivoting youth and mid-80s burnout. The premise was far-fetched, but turbocharged teen fantasy soared just long enough to become a cult memory. 9th Sectors, Warriors of Symbion. Imagine a distant planet where humans bond telepathically with giant mutant insects, forming an elite warrior caste, and you get sectors. The planet Symbion is torn by civil war, with noble Emperor Dargon and his insect legion clashing against the insect-riding rebels. Prince Dargon's loyal sectors mount monstrous beetles, mantises, and wasps in slow-motion battles that look like stop-motion action figures come to life. Each quartet of warriors shares a psychic link with their insect steed, unleashing a bizarre fusion of biology and blood-pumping combat. Advertised alongside a malfunction-prone toy line, only 5 episodes actually aired before cancellation. But kid collectors still remember battling with those dimensional cards and figurines. This insectocalypse remains one of the decade's most insect-infested oddities. 10th Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. Children who bought die-cast models and action figures became fervent, partial historians of 11th. Out of this world. Half human, half alien. Evie Garland can stop time with a snap of her fingers. A telekinetic gift inherited from her extraterrestrial father, hailing from planet Antares. Raised on Earth by her widowed father, she juggles high school crushes, mean girls, and, oh yes, alien assassins determined to wipe out the Garland bloodline. Evie's daily struggles range from forgetting her algebra assignment to freezing an auditorium to save her little brother. As the series progressed, the sitcom oscillated between zany teen hijinks and sci-fi hide-and-seek, culminating in cliffhangers that never fully resolved. Despite solid ratings across 4 seasons, network execs axed it before tying loose ends. For any 80s teen, Evie's half-extraterrestrial identity was a thrilling metaphor for high school alienation, spiced up by literal alien invaders. 12th Space Academy. Although it debuted in 1977, Space Academy's reruns kept its oddball legacy alive throughout the early 80s. Set in the star year 3732, cadets train under Commander Gampu at a futuristic school orbiting Earth. Each young trainee sports quirky abilities, telepathy, super strength, or exceptional engineering, to combat cosmic threats requiring moral integrity over firepower. Episodes launch them from zero-gravity classrooms to first contact with tentacled aliens, all while teaching ethical lessons about environmentalism and cooperation. Flashy sets populated by helmeted, helmetless cadets foster the illusion of a high-technology future. Though canceled after 1 season of 13 episodes, the program's zeal for earnest, morally driven space adventure sowed seeds for later teen sci-fi, making Space Academy a hidden milestone in 80s children's programming. 13. Tales of the Gold Monkey. Transport yourself to 1938. Ex-Flying Tigers. Pilot Jake Cutter runs Pan-Pacific Air Services on a remote South Pacific island, ferrying clients and contraband on his aging Grumman Goose amphibious plane. Alongside his one-eyed mechanic, Corky, and his loyal dog, Jack, he tangles with treasure hunters, Nazis, and voodoo curses, often for a drink at the Monkey Bar, where bartender Sarah Stickney White croons torch songs. Every episode unfolds like an Indiana Jones serial, pitting Jake against villainous art thieves or occult rituals in Polynesian jungles. Ratings were strong. Tales of Nazi spies and lost Aztec gold appealed to primetime adventurers, but ABC pulled the plug after 24 episodes. Even so, its exotic locales, pulpy action, and romantic subplots cemented it as an evergreen cult classic for 80s nostalgia seekers. 14th Misfits of Science. If you combined the Goonies, X-Men, and Ferris Bueller in a blender, you'd get Misfits of Science, a ragtag team of superpowered outcasts for hire. Johnny B shoots lightning from his hands. Gloria Dinalo telekinetically moves objects. Dr. Billy Hayes invents wacky gadgets. Dr. Elvin L. Lincoln transforms into a super-strong brat complete with a tail. They operate from a high-tech van, embarking on offbeat missions, from rescuing mutant animals to foiling bank robberies, all scored to synth-heavy rock. Courtney Cox shows up as a military liaison in early episodes. Despite charming chemistry and abundant 80s style, NBC canceled it after 18 episodes because ratings just didn't spark. Today it remains a retro sci-fi cult favorite for anyone who wondered, what if Misfits saved the world? 15th Riptide. Melding detective noir with 80s tech obsession, Riptide follows Vietnam vet friends Cody Allen and Nick Ryder, plus hack genius Murray Boz Basinski, who run a detective agency aboard the luxury speedboat Riptide. Their high-tech arsenal includes robos, talking robot in a trench coat, laptop-style microcomputers, and a helicopter that duels bad guys in midair. Each episode spins a globe-trotting mystery, missing heiresses, espionage in the Hollywood Hills, or stolen artwork in the Bahamas. Despite slick cinematography and a catchy theme, it sometimes feels like Mission: Impossible on water. Cheesy one-liners meet circuit boards. Riptide got 3 seasons and 57 episodes, but faded when viewers craved darker, edgier drama. Still, its blend of nautical action and computer-powered sleuthing made it an unforgettable oddity. 16. The Highwayman. Picture Mad Max's nomadic energy, drop-kicked into suburban America. The Highwayman is a lone enforcer driving a heavily armored semi-truck rigged with missiles, a speed dome, and a detachable helicopter cab. The mysterious motorist helps those plagued by people who break the law, racing across dystopian highways in a leather trench coat and mirrored goggles. Each episode blanketed rugged back roads with explosive chases, gadget-heavy showdowns, and villainous road pirates. The Highwayman's rig doubles as a futuristic fortress on wheels, even converting into a chopper for airborne pursuit. Despite cinematic ambition and 9 adrenaline-fueled episodes, NBC canceled it due to steep production costs. Today, it stands as a gleaming testament to 80s appetite for high-octane, high-concept adventures. 17th Voyagers? Time travel for kids. That's the pitch of Voyagers. Phineas Bogg, a 19th century Voyager, wields the Omni, a glowing pocket watch that zips him through history to correct anomalies. When he rescues unsuspecting schoolboy Jeffrey Jones, they pair up. One's a rugged, fedora-clad wanderer, the other a bespectacled 10-year-old who questions everything. Together, they bound from ancient Egypt to the California gold rush, ensuring famous events unfold as written. "Whoa, Bogg, how do we know if this really happened?" becomes their mantra. Budget constraints mean shoebox miniatures of pyramids and mediocre period costumes. But for viewers, it's a toddler's first brush with history. Canceled after 17 episodes, Voyagers now exists as a cult touchstone for anyone who wondered how Dyson's vacuum might fare in Victorian London. 18. The Phoenix. A lonely archaeologist unearths Bennu of the Golden Light, an alien sleeper who has rested on Earth for millennia, only to awaken him in modern Southern California. Bennu emerges as a gentle, prodigiously powerful being. Telepathy, telekinesis, and a healing touch define his quest to find his lost companion Mira. Instead of airwolf chases or neon technobabble, this series weaves mysticism with warm, introspective drama. Bennu is as likely to counsel troubled teens as he is to deflect bullets with a thought. Cancelled after 5 episodes due to low ratings, The Phoenix left unresolved storylines, Bennu's ultimate fate, Mara's whereabouts, dangling in narrative limbo. Yet for those who caught its brief run, its blend of spiritual inquiry and alien magic renders it one of the decade's quietest, most enigmatic oddballs. 19th. Pee-wee's Playhouse. On the surface, Pee-wee's Playhouse is a kid's cartoon come to life. Only everyone is real, and logic has left the building. Paul Rubens stars as Pee-wee Herman, a perpetually manic man-child who lives in a Technicolor fantasy bungalow where furniture chats, pterodactyls squawk, and a disembodied genie grants surreal wishes. His daily routine includes secret word sequences, saying giggle or pelican, unleashes a collective scream from everyone inside. Stall bounce Chuck Wagner puppeteers Conky the robot, and Cherry the hugging chair, while random stop-motion segments insert claymation dinosaurs into the mix. Its frenetic pace and psychedelic aesthetics won Emmy Awards, yet behind the scenes, actors despise the trapdoor-laden set. Over 5 seasons, Pee-wee's Playhouse blurred the line between children's entertainment and performance art, securing its legacy as one of TV's most exuberantly bizarre experiences. 20th. The Edison Twins. At first glance, this looks like a straightforward kids' detective show. Siblings Tom and Annie Edison solve mysteries using science. But each 22-minute episode ends with an educational science lab segment, where they break down the real-world principles behind their sleuthing. One week, they might rig a satellite dish to decode secret messages, The next, they'll demonstrate how to calculate velocity with skateboards. Behind every adolescent drama, bullies, broken-down jalopies, lurks a crash course in chemistry, physics, or biology. The show ran a remarkable 6 seasons, 78 episodes on the CBC and American public television stations, yet few recall its existence today. In a decade of neon distractions, the Edison twins quietly nurtured scientific curiosity, making it a stealth oddity. Part sitcom, part TED Talk, all 80s instructional flair. Ever watched an old cartoon and thought, wait, this wasn't meant for kids, was it? The 1960s and 70s were when animation lost its innocence. Bright colors hid rebellion, madness, and meaning few understood. These weren't Saturday morning shows. They were experiments disguised as fun. Behind every smiling character was a message too bold for its time. Stay with me, because once you see what these animators were really doing, you'll never look at cartoons the same way again. Number 15, Watership Down, 1978. It looked like a simple story about rabbits. It wasn't. Watership Down tricked millions into thinking they were in for a peaceful countryside adventure, fluffy heroes, green meadows, soft music. Then came the nightmares. The film's serene start turned into one of the most emotionally brutal journeys ever animated. Rabbits clawed, fought, and bled in ways no one expected from a cartoon. Parents stormed theaters demanding refunds. Children left crying, unsure why their cute animal story turned into a tragedy about power survival and fear. Director Martin Rosen based the film on Richard Adams's best-selling novel, but the studio marketed it as family-friendly. Big mistake. Behind the hand-painted frames was a political allegory about oppression, leadership, and the cost of freedom. Every rabbit colony represented a different form of government democracy, dictatorship, or chaos. Even the villain General Woundwort wasn't evil for the sake of it. He was a leader corrupted by fear. What made it unforgettable was its emotional honesty. The violence wasn't for shock. It was a metaphor for the struggle to stay free in a world that punishes the weak. Viewers in 1978 had never seen animation this raw or sincere. Some still call it the most traumatizing cartoon ever made. But under the horror beats a strange beauty proof that animation could feel as human and as heartbreaking as any live-action film. Number 14, Wizards, 1977. Imagine a fairy tale that smashes headfirst into a post-apocalyptic wasteland that's Wizards. Ralph Bakshi, the wild mind behind Fritz the Cat, created a fantasy where magic and technology fight for the ruins of the Earth. On the surface, it looked like another sword and sorcery adventure. Beneath that, a cold reflection on humanity's obsession with destruction. The movie's two main wizards, Avatar and Black Wolf, represented opposite philosophies. One believed in peace and imagination, the other in fear and propaganda. And yes, Bakshi actually used real archival war footage rotoscoped into animated battle scenes to drive his point home. For audiences expecting elves and unicorns, that was a jarring wake-up call. Wizards looked hand-drawn and hopeful, but carried an undercurrent of despair. Its message was blunt. Even in a fantasy world, humanity's worst habits don't die, they just change shape. The contrast between goofy, comedy, and dark realism made the movie feel unstable, like a dream teetering on the edge of a nightmare. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it brilliant, others called it insane. But what's undeniable is that Wizards was decades ahead of its time, a psychedelic anti-war fable disguised as a cartoon for dreamers. Watch it today, and you'll see reflections of every conflict that still defines the real world. Number 13, Once Upon a Girl, 1976. You think you know fairy tales? Think again. Once Upon a Girl began as a courtroom comedy with Mother Goose on trial for corrupting classic bedtime stories. What followed was a parade of twisted retellings that turned the sweetness of childhood folklore upside down. The art looked suspiciously polished, because many of its animators had worked at big-name studios before deciding to rebel. They poured their frustration into a film that mocked the idea that cartoons should always be pure. Each story within it, from Little Red Riding Hood to Cinderella, became a dark mirror. The familiar characters we grew up with were suddenly flawed, confused, and very human. The humor was edgy, but intentionally self-aware. It wasn't there to shock, it was there to question why we hide the messy parts of human behavior behind glossy animation. The result was chaos. Critics didn't know whether to laugh or look away. Some called it tasteless, others praised its boldness. Either way, it proved one thing: the line between innocent and inappropriate is paper thin when artists are set free. Once Upon a Girl is still hard to find, but its legend survives as one of the strangest animated experiments of the decade, a film that dared to ask what would happen if bedtime stories finally told the truth. Number 12. Allegro non troppo, 1976. If you've ever seen Fantasia, imagine its European twin, only darker, funnier, and infinitely weirder. Allegro non troppo, created by Italian animator Bruno Bozzetto, used the same concept. Classical music set to animation. But instead of dancing hippos and cheerful colors, it offered surreal stories about loneliness, vanity, and the absurdity of human existence. Each musical segment told its own bizarre tale: a man evolving from an ape only to destroy his world, a lonely cat haunted by memories of lost affection, a bottle that dreams of freedom but ends up trapped again. It was heartbreaking and hilarious in the same breath. The live-action scenes between the cartoons mocked the very idea of art as serious business directors shouting musicians, panicking chaos everywhere. What made Allegro non troppo so unforgettable was its balance of beauty and cynicism. The animation was fluid, the music divine, yet the message was quietly devastating. For all our intelligence, humans repeat the same mistakes endlessly. Audiences expecting a comforting visual symphony were blindsided by existential dread wrapped in classical charm. Even today, it's a masterclass in creative rebellion, an animated poem that makes you laugh, then suddenly question your own place in the universe. Number 11. Tarzan, Shame of the Jungle, 1975. It was meant to parody adventure films and ended up becoming one of the strangest cartoons ever made. Tarzan, Shame of the Jungle, reimagined the famous jungle hero as a clueless wanderer in a wild world that looked familiar but felt wrong. This French-Belgian production used outrageous designs, awkward humor, and bizarre logic to tear apart the myth of the perfect hero. When it crossed into English-speaking markets, the absurdity multiplied, thanks to voice performances from comedians like John Belushi and Bill Murray. Hearing those familiar voices inside a movie that looked like it had escaped from someone's fever dream made the experience even stranger. The film took the classic explorer story and turned it inside out. The jungle wasn't majestic, it was ridiculous. The animals weren't friendly, they were deranged caricatures of human behavior. Every scene felt like a joke, told too long, looping back into madness. It was messy, loud, and unapologetically weird, but that's what made it memorable. Tarzan wasn't trying to be art. It was a dare proof that even the most iconic character could be reimagined as a fool. Critics didn't know whether to laugh or run, but for those who loved animation that mocked its own rules, Shame of the Jungle was the wildest ride of the decade. Number 10. Down and Dirty Duck, 1974. If Fritz the Cat was a revolution, Down and Dirty Duck was its unruly cousin who never got invited to family gatherings. Released under Roger Corman's New World Pictures banner, this underground animated comedy pushed absurdity to new heights. It looked like something drawn on the back of a napkin during a wild weekend, and that's part of its charm. The story followed a mild-mannered insurance clerk named Willard and his talking duck companion. Together, they stumbled through surreal vignettes filled with exaggerated jokes, strange creatures, and biting satire about urban life. Nothing made sense, and that was the point. Down and Dirty Duck wasn't designed to comfort anyone. It mocked everything office culture, romantic cliches, and the very idea of storytelling itself. The animation was crude intentionally so. Characters bent and twisted in impossible ways. The humor felt random, even reckless. Yet, hidden beneath the chaos was a sharp commentary on the emptiness of modern living. While mainstream studios played it safe, this film reveled in its weirdness. Critics were divided. Some dismissed it as nonsense, others saw it as outsider art at its rawest. Decades later, it found cult status among animation historians who recognized its significance. A time capsule of early 70s counterculture expressed through pure creative anarchy. It may not have been beautiful, but it was fearless. Down and Dirty Duck proved that sometimes the ugliest cartoons speak the loudest truths. Number 9. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, 1974. When Ralph Bakshi walked away from the first Fritz the Cat, the studio decided to make a sequel without him. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. And that's exactly what made it fascinating. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat ditched its creator's vision and went completely off the rails. The film was structured as a series of disconnected fantasies, each representing one of Fritz's metaphorical lives. One minute he's in outer space, the next he's in a war zone, then he's in a twisted version of suburbia. Each world reflected a different slice of human absurdity. What made it so strange was how self-aware it became. Fritz was no longer the confident anti-hero, he was a tired wanderer trapped in a cycle of bad decisions and surreal nightmares. The movie felt like a bad dream, drawn by someone who'd seen too much of the real world. The animation ranged from experimental to intentionally rough, as if each scene was designed by a different artist. Critics panned it for lacking purpose, but fans of underground animation appreciated its madness. It wasn't polished like Disney or smart like Bakshi's first film. It was pure chaos, proudly unfiltered. In hindsight, the 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat became a symbol of artistic burnout. It showed how quickly a counterculture movement could lose its spark when imitation replaced inspiration. Still, for those who love weird cinema, it's an unforgettable mess, strange, disjointed, and impossible to look away from. Number 8. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. This isn't just a movie, it's a painting that breathes. Belladonna of Sadness is one of the most visually stunning and emotionally haunting animated films ever made. Produced in Japan by Mushi Production, the same studio behind Astro Boy, it marked the final and most daring chapter of Osamu Tezuka's adult-oriented trilogy. The film tells the tragic story of a young woman betrayed by society and transformed by her pain into something powerful and otherworldly. Every frame looks like watercolor art come to life, elegant, hypnotic, and often disturbing in its emotional intensity. What made Belladonna so remarkable wasn't just its style, it was its tone. The movie doesn't rush. It moves like a slow, fevered dream, drifting between beauty and anguish. The animation flows seamlessly from delicate sketches to surreal, hallucinatory visions that feel more like visual poetry than narrative film. When it was released, audiences didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't a conventional story. It was an experience. Too artistic for mainstream crowds and too intense for casual viewers, it vanished for decades before finally being rediscovered and restored in the 21st century. Now hailed as a masterpiece of avant-garde, animation Belladonna of Sadness remains unforgettable. It's the kind of film that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll, not because it shocks, but because it dares to express raw emotion through art. It's haunting, hypnotic, and completely unlike anything else from its era. Number 7. Fantastic Planet, 1973. Imagine watching a dream drawn by someone who doesn't quite remember what humans are. That's Fantastic Planet, a French-Czech animated masterpiece from René Laloux, a film that feels less like science fiction and more like an alien documentary about us. Set on the distant planet Egom, tiny humans called alms live as pets under the rule of towering blue aliens known as drogs. The imagery is surreal, humans herded like animals, meditating aliens floating in trance, and landscapes that pulse like living organisms. Every movement, every sound feels just slightly wrong intentionally. Underneath its otherworldly surface, Fantastic Planet is a chilling allegory about control and freedom. It mirrors real-world systems of oppression, asking what happens when empathy disappears. The paper-cutout animation gives everything an eerie stillness, as though the film itself is trapped in slow motion. When it premiered, viewers were mesmerized and disturbed in equal measure. Some called it an acid trip of a movie. Others saw it as quiet political genius. Its haunting soundtrack and hand-drawn strangeness gave it a timeless feel, distant yet deeply human. Fantastic Planet doesn't shout its message. It whispers it through discomfort. It teaches that alien worlds don't need to be galaxies away. They can exist right here in our own reflection. Even decades later, it's still one of the most haunting visions ever committed to animation. Number 6. Heavy Traffic, 1973. Ralph Bakshi never played by the rules, and Heavy Traffic was proof. After the controversy of Fritz the Cat, he went darker, grittier, and more personal. The result was a feverish portrait of New York City that felt like part dream, part documentary. The film followed an underground cartoonist navigating life amid chaos, crime, poverty, and lost hope. But it wasn't the story that made Heavy Traffic so shocking. It was how it looked and felt. Bakshi mixed live-action footage with hand-drawn animation, blurring the line between reality and imagination. Streets were grimy, people were exaggerated, and every frame dripped with urban decay. It was both hilarious and heartbreaking, a portrait of survival in a city where innocence had long since packed its bags. Critics were divided once again. Some saw brilliance, others saw madness, but no one could deny the energy. Heavy Traffic throbbed with the pulse of early 1970s America, its frustrations, its humor, and its disillusionment. Bakshi's willingness to merge cartoon fantasy with real human struggle made it revolutionary. He treated animation not as escapism, but as confrontation, a mirror held up to a society falling apart. Heavy Traffic proved that adult cartoons didn't need to be about shock. They could be about truth, messy, uncomfortable, and heartbreakingly real. Number 5. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Before the world had adult animation, it had Fritz the Cat. Ralph Bakshi's groundbreaking film exploded onto screens in 1972 and instantly divided audiences. Based on Robert Crumb's underground comic, it followed a restless cat drifting through city chaos, chasing thrills and questioning everything around him. The animation was colorful, the world full of life, yet its message was pitch black. The counterculture dream had already started to rot. Fritz the Cat made history as the first cartoon ever to earn an X rating, but that wasn't its real legacy. Its power came from attitude, a raw, unapologetic look at a generation losing its idealism. Fritz wasn't a hero, he was a symbol of confusion. Every scene felt improvised, pulsing with the energy of early 70s rebellion. Bakshi used scratchy street-level art to mirror the chaos of urban life. Jazz clubs, protests, and absurd encounters blended together into one surreal portrait of America at its breaking point. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest, too honest for comfort. Critics called it everything from genius to garbage, but no one could ignore it. Fritz the Cat proved that animation could grow up, and maybe that was the scariest part. It broke the illusion that cartoons were safe spaces, showing that the medium could explore the same turmoil, cynicism, and contradictions as real life. Number 4. 1001 Nights, 1969. Long before fantasy epics filled movie theaters, Japan gave us 1001 Nights, the first part of Osamu Tezuka's daring experiment in mature storytelling. It looked like a lush retelling of classic folklore, Aladdin, Sinbad, and Scheherazade, but under the dazzling colors was a complex exploration of desire, ambition, and consequence. The film's visuals were breathtaking. Geometric cities, swirling deserts, and kaleidoscopic transitions that felt like dream logic. Tezuka and his co-director, Eiichi Yamamoto, treated every frame like a painting. It moved with the rhythm of a poem, soft, fluid, yet constantly transforming. When released, audiences were stunned. Some admired its artistry, others didn't know what to make of its surreal tone. It mixed history, fantasy, and psychology into something that defied categorization. The film's message was simple but powerful. No matter how far we chase illusions of pleasure or glory, the human heart remains restless. Decades later, 1001 Nights is seen as the spark that ignited Japan's movement toward more thoughtful adult animation. It showed that cartoons could tell grand, complicated stories, and that imagination could also be a mirror reflecting our deepest contradictions. Number 3. Cleopatra, 1970. From the creator of Astro Boy came a shock no one expected. Cleopatra, the second entry in Osamu Tezuka's trilogy, took one of history's most famous queens and turned her story into a psychedelic odyssey of power, loyalty, and obsession. Audiences went in expecting a history lesson. What they got felt like a fever dream, projected through stained glass. The animation style constantly changed, one moment epic and painterly, the next absurd and cartoonish. Tezuka blended science fiction, time travel, and ancient politics into something that defied all logic, yet somehow made emotional sense. Behind the dazzling imagery was a sobering reflection on how beauty and influence are manipulated across ages. Cleopatra wasn't portrayed as a mythic goddess or a villain. She was a human being struggling to survive in a world ruled by deceit and ego. When it premiered, critics didn't know what to say. Was it satire? Was it tragedy? It was both, and that's why it endured. Cleopatra captured the energy of an era obsessed with reinvention. It wasn't perfect, but it dared to mix myth art and commentary into one sprawling, hypnotic vision. Even now, it feels ahead of its time, a film that invites fascination and confusion in equal measure. Number 2. Yellow Submarine, 1968. Few films have ever looked as cheerful, yet felt as strange as Yellow Submarine. On the surface, it's a musical adventure starring the Beatles saving Pepperland from the Blue Meanies. Beneath the bright colors, it's a journey through the collective consciousness of the 1960s, a cartoon symphony about hope, fear, and the mind itself. The film's psychedelic art direction was revolutionary. Nothing moved the way it was supposed to. Backgrounds melted, shapes breathed, and sound became part of the design. For many viewers, it was their first introduction to surrealism disguised as pop culture. Children saw a lighthearted fantasy. Adults saw something much deeper, a coded story about freedom, triumphing over control, imagination, conquering conformity. Its strange rhythm mirrored the decade's energy, a generation breaking boundaries visually and musically. Yellow Submarine wasn't just an animated film, it was a cultural event. Its influence stretched far beyond the screen into album covers, advertising, and art schools. And while its style has been copied endlessly, nothing matches the purity of its original weirdness. It's cheerful on the outside, cosmic on the inside, a cartoon that taught millions how to dream in color. Number 1. Western Soda, 1965. You might have missed it, but animation historians never did. Italy's Western Soda, directed by Bruno Bozzetto, looked like a playful spoof of cowboy adventures. Instead, it became one of the earliest examples of animation made for grown-ups without saying so out loud. The visuals were deceptively simple, bright colors, quirky movements, and slapstick timing. Yet every joke carried a bite. The film parodied every Hollywood Western cliché: the duel, the damsel, the dusty town with crooked sheriffs. But behind the laughs was a strange melancholy, a sense that the heroic myths of cinema were hollow. What made it weirder was its rhythm. Scenes dragged on, deliberately emphasizing awkward silence instead of punchlines. Gunfights were replaced with absurd chases. Romance turned into confusion. Viewers expecting an upbeat parody walked out unsettled, unsure why they felt uneasy watching something so colorful. Bozzetto's genius was in tone, crafting humor that hid quiet sadness. Western Soda asked if the cowboy legend was ever noble, or just a fantasy we use to feel brave. Critics at the time didn't know what to call it, but later generations recognized it as the first European animated satire aimed squarely at adults. Beneath its cartoon skin lived a sharp social commentary, making it a perfect closing chapter for this era of misunderstood animation. So, which one of these strange creations confused you the most? The 1960s and 70s proved that animation was never just for children. It was a playground for rebellion, satire, and artistic courage. Every frame hid a message, every smile masked a warning. If these films taught us anything, it's that weirdness often tells the truth first. Which of these will you dare to re-watch now that you finally understand what they were really saying?